I've been working the night shift at Joe's Diner for about a year now. It's a quiet little place just off Route 29. The kind of spot truckers and late-night travelers stumble into for a quick meal and a cup of coffee strong enough to keep them awake for the next 100 miles. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. The shift started like any other. Empty tables, the low hum of the jukebox playing some old country song, and the faint smell of grease lingering in the air. It was almost midnight, and I was standing behind the counter, wiping down the same spot for the third time, just to keep my hands busy. That's when he came in. The man was tall and gaunt, his face pale and sharp, like it had been carved out of marble. He wore a black trench coat that hung off his frame like a shadow, and his boots echoed ominously against the tile floor as he walked in. He didn't say a word, just slid into the booth at the far corner, the one right under the flickering neon sign. I grabbed a menu and headed over, but before I could even place it on the table, he looked up at me. His eyes, they were the color of smoke, swirling and hollow, like they were hiding something deep inside. "I'll have the midnight special," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like the sound of tires crunching gravel. That threw me off. "We don't have a midnight special." I opened my mouth to explain that, but the words didn't come out. Instead, I just nodded, turned on my heel, and walked back to the kitchen. I chalked it up to being tired. Long shifts can mess with your brain, but something about him made my skin crawl. I told Charlie, the cook, about the order, and he looked at me like I'd lost it. "The midnight special? We haven't served that in years," he muttered, his face pale. "What do you mean?" I asked, but he just shook his head. "Never mind. I'll make something up." 15 minutes later, I carried a plate of steak, eggs, and hash browns to the man's table. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't even look at the food. He just sat there, staring out the window into the dark, empty highway. The strange thing was he didn't eat, not a bite. He just sat there, his hands folded neatly on the table, staring out into the night. After a while, I got tired of watching him and went back behind the counter to stock the napkins. When I looked up again, he was gone. The plate was still there, untouched, but there was something else on the table, a small folded piece of paper. I walked over and picked it up, my hands shaking for no reason I could explain. Inside, in spidery handwriting, were the words, "He's coming." I felt a chill run down my spine. The air in the diner seemed heavier, darker somehow. I looked around, half expecting to see someone else, but the place was empty. Even Charlie was nowhere to be found. Then the lights started flickering. The jukebox sputtered and died, leaving me in near silence, save for the low hum of the neon sign. I backed up toward the counter, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. And that's when I saw it. A figure was standing just outside the diner, its outline barely visible in the glow of the neon sign. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with long, gangly limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Its head tilted to the side, like it was studying me, and I swear I could hear it breathing, deep, rattling breaths that seemed to vibrate through the glass. I froze, my mind racing. Was this some kind of sick joke? A prank? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The thing outside wasn't human. Couldn't be. The figure stepped closer, and I realized with dawning horror that the neon sign wasn't just flickering. It was spelling something out. One letter at a time, the word formed. Run. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted for the back door, not even bothering to grab my coat. As I ran into the cold night, I glanced over my shoulder and saw the figure inside the diner now, standing where I had been seconds ago. It turned its head toward me, and I swear I saw it smile, a wide, jagged grin that stretched far beyond what should have been possible. I didn't stop running until I reached the gas station down the road. The attendant gave me a weird look as I stumbled in, gasping for breath and shaking like a leaf. When I tried to tell him what happened, he just frowned. "Joe's Diner?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "That place burned down 5 years ago. Electrical fire. No one's been there since." I didn't believe him. Couldn't. But when I went back the next morning, all I found was a charred, crumbling shell of a building, overgrown with weeds. And yet, on the counter, where I'd stood just hours before, was a plate of untouched steak, eggs, and hash browns. I was on a road trip through the Midwest, heading to a friend's wedding. The drive was long and monotonous, with nothing but flat fields stretching for miles. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, fatigue set in, and my stomach growled in protest. I needed food and a break. I spotted a diner up ahead, its neon sign flickering against the twilight. Ruth's Roadside Diner, it read in tired, buzzing letters. The building itself looked like it hadn't seen a renovation since the 1950s. Paint peeling off the walls, cracked windows, and a few rusty cars in the parking lot. It didn't scream inviting, but it was the only option for miles. Inside, the diner was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unnatural glow. A jukebox in the corner stood silent, though it looked like it hadn't worked in decades. There were a handful of patrons scattered across the room, each sitting alone, their heads low over their meals. The smell of greasy burgers and old coffee hung in the air, but something else lurked beneath it, a faint metallic tang I couldn't place. A waitress approached me. She was tall and thin, with a uniform that seemed a size too large. Her name tag read Marge, and she had a vacant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just one tonight?" she asked, her voice monotone. I nodded, and she led me to a booth near the back. The table was sticky, and the ketchup bottle had a crusty rim. The menu was laminated but worn, the print fading in places. As I looked over it, I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. Something about the diner felt off. Marge returned with a glass of water. The glass was cloudy, and a smudge of red lipstick clung to the rim. I didn't drink it. Instead, I ordered a cheeseburger and fries, hoping to eat quickly and get back on the road. While waiting for my food, I observed the other patrons. They all seemed odd. A man in a trucker hat at the counter was staring into his coffee cup, his lips moving as if in prayer. A woman in the corner booth was cutting into a slice of pie but never actually ate it. She just moved the pieces around on her plate. Then there was the couple by the window. They sat motionless, hands clasped across the table, staring at each other. Neither blinked. I tried not to look too long. Something about them made my stomach churn. My food arrived, and as I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced up and caught Marge staring at me from behind the counter. She quickly turned away, but not before I noticed how pale her skin was, almost translucent under the harsh lights. I forced down a few bites of the burger. Tasted wrong. The texture was off, like the meat had been frozen for years and hastily thawed. I pushed the plate aside and decided I'd just leave. When I went to pay, Marge handed me my receipt with that same hollow smile. "Drive safe," she said, her eyes lingering on me a beat too long. As I walked out, the other patrons all turned to look at me in unison. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I swear I saw it. The air felt heavy, and my pulse quickened. Once outside, I hurried to my car. That's when I noticed something strange. The diner sign was no longer flickering. It was completely dark. I turned back to look at the building, and the interior lights were off too. I checked my watch. It had been less than 30 minutes since I arrived. How could they close so suddenly? As I got in my car, I looked at the receipt in my hand. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a receipt at all. It was a handwritten note. "You shouldn't have stopped here. Get out. Don't look back." I didn't need to be told twice. I floored the gas pedal, tearing out of the gravel lot and back onto the highway. My hands were trembling, and my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. A mile down the road, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The diner was gone. There was nothing but an empty lot where it had been. To this day, I can't explain what happened. I don't know if it was a trick of the mind, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, or something far worse. All I know is I'll never stop at an isolated diner again.